everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Fandoms Assemble, where we break down content from all your favorite fandoms, from the Marvel Universe to Harry Potter and the wider Wizarding World, Disney, Pixar, Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and really whatever else this golden age of IP decides to throw at us next. My name's Steve Oborn Jr., and as always, I am your host as we continue on this journey through the magic of modern-day media. I'd like to take a moment to thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending a portion of your day with me, and I hope you find this pod to be both entertaining and informative, but most importantly, a satisfying resource for all those who love to think way too hard about our favorite movies, books, and television shows. If you're like me, you run to the Reddit boards and Twitter feeds after that latest episode drops, and you're already Googling Easter eggs on the ride home from the movie theater. I'm here to tell you that that's okay. There are others of us out there, and I hope that Fandoms Assemble can be the arena where all that beautiful obsession can live and grow. Let's get to it. This episode of Fandoms Assemble will be covering Loki Season 1, Episode 2. Before we get into the details of the episode, a quick recap on what we saw in Episode 1. So, this show picks up after Avengers 2012, where Loki escapes with the Tesseract in the timeline break that occurred because of Endgame. So we see the TVA, the Time Variance Authority, arresting Loki. We got the head agent at the TVA, Mobius, chasing a big bad variant who's out there killing their Minutemen who are their police. In order to catch this variant, Mobius is eliciting Loki's help because we find out by the end of the episode that we are chasing an alternate reality Loki. And in order to catch them, we need to understand what makes Loki tick. Throughout the episode, Loki is having a large problem accepting that fate has already been written, that the Timekeepers are real and his story is not necessarily his own. He finally comes to accept the ultimate power of the TVA, and we close the episode with a shot in Oklahoma in the 1850s where another attack on Minutemen has occurred. So we pick up Episode 1 at a Renaissance fair in Wisconsin in 1985, where the TVA is proactively showing up to catch a variant. They feel variant energy there, but as of yet, no Nexus events have occurred. Nothing has occurred that would damage the timeline. As they enter a tent where they see the energy coming from, audio comes over, a pre-recording from the Renaissance Fair, and it is apparent that the evil variant Loki is here and that they are going to attack the Minutemen in an ambush. We see a hand come out with some green magic touch the forehead of Minutemen C20, who's leading this operation, and then she starts to go around and kill all her other Minutemen as I Need a Hero plays for all our enjoyment. At the end, Loki steals not only the time charge and a time door control, but he kidnaps C20 and escapes. While all this is going on, we get a flash over to inside TVA headquarters where Loki is getting onboarded. He found himself a shirt and a tie, and he is being given the TVA training by Miss Minutes. While he's more or less ignoring the training and just messing with Miss Minutes while reading Mobius' jet ski magazine, Mobius comes up to Loki and says, hey, we gotta go. There's been another attack, and they go and get briefed by B-15 on the attack that we just saw happen at the Wisconsin Renaissance Fair. We find out here during this briefing that Loki has always been one of the primary threats for the TVA across time. He just appears in a different form, which is important to keep in mind for what we see at the end of this episode, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. But we see Loki as like a giant, bumbling, strong caveman. We see him as this alien life form. We see him as more or less himself. But important to note that Lokis throughout time have always challenged the power of the TVA, have always used their magic to try and manipulate the sacred timeline. As they break to get to the Renaissance Fair in Wisconsin, Mobius dangles, hey, if you help us, if we catch this evil variant Loki, then an audience with the Timekeepers is on the table. And we instantly see this pique Loki's attention. Why? Is he trying to attack the Timekeepers? Is he doing something, he speaks to at the end of the episode that he may be doing something shady and have his own motivations. But our Loki, at least the Loki we've seen go through the character development, doesn't really have that in him. So is it all for show? Is it all superficial? As we said in the last episode, Loki hurts people for a superficial reason of wanting to be the king of Midgard. That's not really what drives him. So here, is his plan really to try and take over the TVA, to overthrow the Timekeepers, and that's why he wants an audience with them? Or is he just that same cold little boy that Mobius references later in the episode, and he just wants to really get a glimpse at who these ultimate powers are. We get a line here that Nexus events destabilize time flow. And I want to key in on the word Nexus. We saw that word in WandaVision in one of the commercials. There was a pill box that talked about time, and it had the name of the medicine was referred to as Nexus. So if Nexus events really destabilize the time flow, did Wanda Maximoff create a Nexus event? Are we going to see the TVA encounter Wanda in some fashion? I believe so, and we'll get into that more later in this episode. But at the Renaissance Fair, we see them enter the tent, and they're looking around. They see that the Minutemen are killed. They see C-20 has been kidnapped. They see that there's no time charge. They see that the time door control has been taken. And unfortunately for us who want to see Loki doing the right thing, he starts stalling to put pressure on the Minutemen and Mobius to agree to a meeting with the Timekeepers. He starts going in and creating this story about how the real evil variant Loki is right outside the tent wanting to attack them. He starts explaining the variant Loki's motivations and getting into how if he was that evil variant, here's what he would do. And he's giving the Silver Tongue spin in order to keep the pressure building as the line approaches the red line of creating a Nexus event in which they won't be able to reverse this incident. And you can see here that Loki really is the master of manipulation as he's going through the story. He's very long-winded. Then as the red line grows, he starts building things in. He starts throwing out little tidbits to really catch their interest. Like, hey, no, I'm almost at my point. Finally, Mobius catches on when he breaks and says, hey, I'll tell you what you really need to know, but you need to make me assurances that I'm actually going to get a meeting with the Timekeepers, that I'm not going to be killed as soon as this evil variant Loki is captured. Flips a switch in Mobius's head, and he says, listen, this is all BS. He's not here. Let's blow this shit up and let's get out of here. We then cut over back at the TVA where Mobius is having a meeting with the judge from Loki's trial, who we finally get a name to, Ravonna Rennslayer. Keep an eye on her for this episode's Fandom Academy. So he's talking to Rennslayer, and she's starting to question the viability of using this Loki as an asset for the TVA in catching evil variant Loki. Ravonna says, listen, the Timekeepers are closely monitoring this situation. They're keeping an eye on you, and they didn't like what they saw with Loki stalling for time and trying to destabilize the timeline there in 1985 Wisconsin. She then has Mobius sign an incident report, an event report, and I made note of the pen, and she refers to the person who gave her the pen as her analyst on the side. Now, the pen said FDR High School. FDR High School, a real place in Brooklyn, but unfortunately has no reference to anything in the Marvel Comics. If you want to take an intellectual leap with me, however, Brooklyn, obviously the hometown of Steve Rogers, Captain America. In the comics, FDR is the one who gave Captain America his shield. He's also the president who creates the organization of S.H.I.E.L.D. And in Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on ABC, there was a storyline involving time-traveling robots who go back to kill President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So, are they saying there, are they just hinting that somehow the TVA was involved in that storyline? Are they going to bring Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. more involved into the Marvel Universe to get people to go back and watch that show? Or is that to just get us back in the frame of mind of New York City, where a lot of the Marvel storyline in the comics happens, a lot of the major heroes are from New York or are based in New York, and that Rennslayer has someone maybe outside the TVA or who came in from outside the TVA from storylines we know of that is informing her and is providing her with intel from the sacred timeline. Mobius then leaves after signing the paperwork. Outside, Loki is chasing after him, scrambling to explain why he did what he did. Oh, I'm trying to give you your first insight into how Loki talks. He stalls for time. He does all these things, yada, 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 yada. He then goes into how Mobius has no idea what his real motivations are, and Mobius basically lays out his whole plot. You're trying to gain my confidence so you get a meeting with the Timekeepers so you can swoon them and overthrow them and take over the TVA. It looks like Loki's punched in the face. We talked about whether this was a real plan or just a superficial plan, but either way, it's kind of been blown up for Loki. And for them to go there now with our Loki would be kind of stupid now that the jig is already up. So I hope that this just washes away any instance of our Loki turning bad against the TVA here. Mobius and Loki then go upstairs, downstairs, not sure, but Mobius is taking Loki to the library. He says he wants the help, so okay, get in our records library and do some research on every case file from evil variant Loki. Loki's doing that for a while and he gets bored, and then he goes and approaches the secretary, the librarian, and asks for files on the creation of the TVA. She says no. He says, okay, well, let me get something on the beginning or the end of time then. She also says no. He says, fine, well, what the hell can you give me? And she gives him more files on himself. Nonetheless, he takes those files and he goes and sits down where he comes across a file on Ragnarok. He's reading about the destruction of Asgard, how everyone on the planet in this instance of Ragnarok was killed, and he starts to tear up. He starts to cry because we know that our Loki is not all bad. He really did love his brother. He loved torturing the people of Asgard. He loved being the god of mischief, but he's still an Asgardian. He still holds them all close to his heart. He still loves his father, his mother, his brother. Okay? So I'll raise the question here. Evil variant Loki. As we know, they're not all bad and they truly love their family. The Lokis all look different, but they all more or less have the same motivations. That's why Mobius is inciting the help of our Loki. So I'm going to proffer, is the evil variant Loki looking to steal time charges to stop Ragnarok in her timeline? I'll leave that there for now. Loki then starts to read through the Ragnarok file. His mind starts turning and he runs after Mobius and says, hey, I've got it. The evil variant Loki is using apocalypses to hide their Nexus events. They are hiding in the timeline in Nexus events. We get a comedic break here where he steals Mobius's lunch and goes through a description. But essentially what he's saying is when a hurricane, when an earthquake, when Ragnarok, when a meteor occurs and wipes out everything in that area, it essentially acts as a time charge. And a variant can go and hide in that event, bounce around from time to time in the period before the Nexus event occurs. And it never does occur because that meteor hits and it wipes everything off the face of the earth. So they go and test this. They head to Pompeii, which for those listening who don't know what Pompeii is, it was a catastrophic event in 79 AD where a volcano occurred and it wiped out the town of Pompeii completely. And it's odd because you can see the people who lived in Pompeii frozen in time in volcanic ash, people hugging their children, sitting at their dinner table, whatever, accepting their fates, and kind of a meta example of the TVA in this whole time theory. The people of Pompeii were essentially frozen in time, fossilized by this volcano. So they're in Pompeii, and Loki is going around telling him he's from the future. He's kicking things over. He's letting goats free. He's doing all this shit. And Mobius does not see any Nexus energy appearing on his thing. Loki's theory is confirmed. So with this theory proven, they head back to the TVA and they start looking for where evil variant Loki could be hiding. While they're sitting around, though, they also get into a jet ski conversation. They talk about the jet ski magazine that Loki had stolen from Mobius. And important to note, these people were apparently created by the TVA. When Loki referenced a fish, Casey didn't even know what a fish was. But Mobius is obsessed with jet skis? He says he's never ridden one, or he says he can't go and ride one. But I question, is Mobius a real person? And we'll get to that in this episode's Tinfoil Hat Time. As they move on from the jet ski conversation, Loki is talking about how he can't believe the Timekeeper's story. There's just 3 giant space lizards which are ruling all of time and space and the flow of a quote-unquote sacred timeline with the TVA there to keep order just sounds like bullshit. But then Mobius challenges him and says, listen, dude, who are you? You're Loki, a god of Asgard, the god of mischief with Odin as your father and Thor as your brother, who was really an orphan frost giant. He's like, listen, if everyone goes into the story of how they came to be, the probabilities of them existing in the universe. It all sounds like bullshit. So you need to get your head around that this timekeeper story is real because you're sitting in this building because of them. He then says, okay, well, how does this all end? If the story's been written, then the timekeepers must know how this ends. They must know we must catch evil variant Loki because we're here and time hasn't been completely ruined. To which Mobius explains for Loki and for us, no, the timekeepers are still writing the future. However, the TVA is there to keep order in quote-unquote what came before. So I talked about in episode 1's Fandom Academy about the TVA and how they were not created at the beginning of time. They were created at a point in the very far future whose job was to untangle the multiversal wars of the past and create the sacred timeline. So what Mobius is saying here in the what came before, that is the TVA's purview. Yes, the timekeepers are working on keeping things in order moving forward. However, the TVA's job is only focused on the past and the present. Back to business, they see that while all these attacks were essentially similar, in France, back in the first episode, evil variant Loki interacted with a child who was there in 1500s provincial France and gave them the kablooey gum. Now that's huge here because evil variant Loki dated themselves. When they look up kablooey, it is a gum that was only sold between 2047 and 2051 regionally in the United States. So they start digging through all of the files that happened in that time. Catastrophic apocalypse level events that occurred in the southeast of the United States within those 4 or 5 years. Loki finally stumbles upon that file, much to the applause of Mobius, where he attaches kablooey. And he gets the Rocks Cart building where a storm is occurring. That is where Loki could have bought the gum. There's a lot of resources there. The storm, the hurricane that's coming is about to wipe everyone out. So they jump to Alabama in 2050 at a Rocks Cart. Important in the Marvel Comics is kind of a looming corporate power, i.e. Walmart and Amazon taking over the world. But first, they need to sell it to Ravonna to clear the mission. So we see Mobius back in her office saying, listen, we need to go to 2050. This is where evil variant Loki is hiding in these apocalypse events. We've uncovered their plan. She grants them permission, and they get a briefing before the mission where Mobius tries to hand Loki weapons. B-15 comically takes them away because she doesn't care who he is, if he's trying to help, if he solved this case. She's not giving him a weapon. He's a variant. He's not supposed to exist. She so desperately wants to crack him with the time baton and erase him from the earth. And through the time door they go. When circling up inside Rock's cart, Mobius goes to take Loki with him, and B-15 says, hell no, he is coming with me. This is a field mission. I am in charge now, and I'm going to take the most dangerous person in this group with me to keep an eye on him. So to summarize what happens next to try and keep this as concise as possible, we have evil variant Loki taking over the minds, just like they did with C20, of the customers within the store. So first we get a gentleman who's there searching for plants, shopping for plants. He says it's a hurricane sale. And B-15 says, hey, could this be you? Loki says, yeah, I would have wore a suit because our Loki is a proper English gentleman. However, yes, obviously it is Loki controlling this guy's mind. Not for long, however, because he then jumps into B-15's body. After talking to Loki with B-15, they then jump into Randy, who's an employee of Roxcart's mind. While inside Randy, we get an important tidbit here where Loki refers to evil variant Loki as Loki, and they say, please don't call me that. Now, that's an interesting thing. I'm wondering why that's occurring. I'm assuming that we're going to get that at some point in the next few episodes. To cut away from the Lokis for a minute, we finally find C20 in the employee security room of this Rocks cart freaking out, saying it's real, it's real, it's real, it's real. What's real? We don't really get an answer to. But she tells Mobius and her fellow Minutemen that she gave away the location of the TVA. She gave away the ability to find where the timekeepers are to evil variant Loki. Back outside in the store, more switching occurs. Evil variant Loki goes from Randy to what I can only describe as Larry the Cable Guy. I'm actually surprised he didn't want a cameo here as this character. But after this one getting very physical with our Loki, Loki finally says, listen, just reveal yourself to me. Stop hiding. And we get the reveal. Drum roll, please. Lady Loki. It's a woman. As we got shown in the TVA debrief before they went on their mission to the Renaissance Fair, Loki appears in different forms throughout the timeline. This one happens to be female. However, we can see that Loki's Asgardian wardrobe, the little horns on her head, still hold true across all variations of our boy Loki, which is why the kid in provincial France pointed at the picture of the devil, because obviously she probably had a hood on and he could only see the horns popping through and the silver tongue speaking to him in a language that he didn't understand. But now it's time for the big climax, okay? And this is going to lead into our closing segments of the show. We see that Loki, female Loki, Lady Loki, whatever we want to call her, we'll call her Lady Loki, has set off all 50 charges that she's stolen from these different timelines. She's got them spread all across the store, and the TVA and Loki in attendance can't really do anything. They have no idea what she's doing. They think she's just trying to blow up the store, maybe to kill Mobius, maybe to kill this variant of Loki. What we see next is ever more horrifying, though. She has the time door control, and she turns them on and creates a little time door underneath every one of the time charges and essentially bombs the sacred timeline. She sends these time charges into God knows where. We know where because we saw the screen on the time door control. But she sends these charges out for what reason, we don't really know. These aren't responding to Nexus events. So essentially what they're going to do is to create Nexus events, the time charge itself, erasing people from that part of the universe at that time that she's sending it into. And we see the screen back at the TVA is just sending the timeline into disarray. There's offshoots, there's branches created everywhere. And we get a shot from inside the little NASA control room at the TVA saying that someone is bombing the sacred timeline. Back in the store, we then see Lady Loki go through her own time door. With the TVA in chase, Loki is looking at them. Our Loki is looking at them. He's looking at the time door, and he sneaks through as the time door closes and Mobius is sitting left there to alone deal with the time charges, not only destroying space and time as we know it, but now he has to explain to Ravonna and the Timekeepers how he not only lost Lady Loki, but he lost their asset Loki as well. That'll do it, folks, for the episode breakdown of Loki, Season 1, Episode 2. And as I said, that last scene is going to lead directly into our next segment. But before we get there, as you know, Fandoms Assemble strives to be the #1 resource on the internet for all those who love to think way too hard about our favorite movies, books, and television shows. To honor that promise, we can't just give you the same old boring episode breakdown. We got to give you some analysis. We got to give you some notes. We got to give you some things to think about. So to honor that promise, here are the top 5 questions we had on Loki, Season 1, Episode 2. Question number 1. Is the timeline bomb we just saw going to create the multiverse right here and right now? I think yes, it is. There is no way to avoid all of these branches going off at the same time. Unless the TVA, because they're outside space and time, can do something that breaks their traditional rules, they do not have enough staff to go and correct the impacts that these time charges are going to have. And really, what are they going to do? It's the time charges creating the Nexus events. It's a next level paradox created here by Lady Loki that you can't then go and report to these Nexus events with a time charge because it's time charges that are creating them. What are you going to do? Just put another time charge down and create an even bigger hole in the timeline? So I think, yes, this immediately sets us up for Phase 4. While WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier were cool, Phase 4 is going to be about the multiverse, and Episode 2 of Loki is the most impactful thing we've seen in the MCU to date in creating the multiverse. It's happening right now. Question number 2, and we touched on this in the episode recap briefly, but was Wanda a Nexus event? As I said, we had the Easter egg in WandaVision in one of the commercials. There was a medicine box in one of those commercials that read Nexus, and the ad had said, when you feel like the world is quote unquote going on without you. It also said that this was meant to anchor you back to your reality or the reality of your choice. So heavy time implications there in the WandaVision commercial, which in light of what we're seeing in Loki right now, leads me to believe that Wanda Maximoff herself was a Nexus event. Why the TVA didn't immediately intercede? Well, perhaps they couldn't infiltrate the magic of the Hex. Perhaps after this timeline bomb, they don't exist anymore. Maybe they're just gun-shy at interfering in such matters if the authorities at hand, in the case of WandaVision, it was SWORD, can handle the event themselves and can socialize the impacts of that event in that timeline. But then that also raises the question, because we didn't see the TVA immediately intercede in WandaVision, are we to believe that Wanda's Hex, that Nexus event that was created was supposed to happen? It wasn't a Nexus event. It's weird that we would have gotten that word in the WandaVision commercial then. But was that event allowed? Or because we're leading into the multiverse, are the Timekeepers dead? Does Lady Loki win here? And we're looking at WandaVision in the aftermath of this happening. And it's just a free-for-all, and it doesn't matter that she's altering the course of events. I'm interested to see if we see Wanda Maximoff in this story, if the TVA takes a trip to Westview as a result of these timeline bombs, and how those two who are so heavily geared towards the Multiverse of Madness movie, Doctor Strange 2, how they're finally going to run into each other. Question number 3, is Mobius a real person, and is he going to go bad? So we get in that scene with Loki and Mobius talking about the Jet Ski magazine, how he's saying in the 90s there was this perfect thing, this perfect collision of form and function. It was called the jet ski, and how beautiful the jet ski is. And he's mourning the fact that he cannot ride a jet ski. But again, we brought up in the episode recap that Casey doesn't even know what a fish is, but Mobius is talking about a jet ski like it's his one tether to a life gone by. Well, my question here is it? Is Mobius a real person? He says that he was created by the TVA, the Timekeepers. All of this was created by the Timekeepers, rather. Every person who works at the TVA was created. But is Mobius a variant like Loki, who sweet-talked his way into becoming an asset, just like Loki did? And that is why Mobius is so strong to use variants as assets in catching other threats to the sacred timeline, because he himself was that person. We also get a line in here from Loki which says not all people are all good or all bad, and we get kind of an ominous silence after that between the two. And so is Mobius a real person, and is he going to go bad here? More on another internal threat inside the TVA in this episode's Fandom Academy. Stay tuned. One more note on Mobius, though, before we move on. He's also drinking Josta Seltzer energy drink. And as I said, that energy drink was created by the Pepsi Corporation in the 90s. So he is romanticizing the 90s in every flip. Hold on. I was going to cut that out, but I don't know what the hell that sound was. Fwah. Anyway. He is romanticizing the 90s in every form possible. So I think that Mobius is really a real person, and we'll get into that more in Tinfoil Hat Time. Question number 4, and obviously this is the overarching question of the entire show, but what is Lady Loki's purpose? So we see her steal the time charges. We see her bomb the sacred timeline with said time charges. But to what end? What could she possibly be wanting? I proffered in the episode breakdown that she might be trying to stop Ragnarok in her own timeline, but there's no reason for her to attack every other city on the face of the earth, all these major points in time that we've seen the Avengers throughout the MCU, if she was just focusing on her version of Asgard and Surtur's attempt at creating Ragnarok. And question number 5 in our Fandom Academy for this week's episode. Who is Ravonna Rennslayer? Folks, as you know, Fandoms Assemble strives to be the #1 resource on the internet for all those who love to think way too hard about our favorite movies, books, and television shows. But to honor that promise, we can't just raise life's great questions, we gotta answer a few of them ourselves. So sharpen your pencils, crack open those textbooks, please put down that copy of my Jet Ski magazine and join me for this episode's Fandom Academy on Ravonna Rennslayer. So folks, to start out, I'll be honest. As I go through these Fandom Academies sometimes, I feel like I'm providing you information that may spoil a very large plot point in the show that we are watching, whether it was Falcon and the Winter Soldier, whether it was the few episodes I have on hand for WandaVision. I promise those are coming. Or whether it was the first episode of Loki. But this Ravonna Rennslayer reveal that I'm about to delve into in this episode's Fandom Academy touches that line. And I apologize if any of you listening want to be surprised. Maybe you skip this episode of Fandom Academy until it comes along in the show. That being said, let's get into it. So Ravonna Rennslayer is a fictional character appearing in the Marvel Comics. First appeared in Avengers 23 from December 1965, created by Stan Lee and Don Heck. Ravonna Rennslayer was the daughter of King Carolus, a ruler in the Marvel Universe's 40th century Earth. The Kingdom of Carolus was the last bastion of civilization unconquered by Kang the Conqueror. I mentioned in the last episode that Kang the Conqueror would be coming to the MCU in Ant-Man Quantumania. Is it possible that Kang the Conqueror finds his way into Loki first? Now, as I said, King Carolus' kingdom was spared by Kang the Conqueror. Why? Because he was in love with Ravonna Rennslayer. In this arc, Kang brings the Avengers into their timeline where he hopes to woo Ravonna Rennslayer by showing her how strong he was at defeating the Avengers. Of course, this never really works out for the villains when they say, oh, let me impress this girl I like by beating up this nerd in school or showing her how strong I am. So, of course, Ravonna teamed up with the Avengers when Kang summoned a full-on attack of her kingdom. That being said, the invasion on Kang's part works. He defeats the Avengers. He conquers King Carolus' kingdom, and he goes and orders a wedding ceremony. Now, Kang was supposed to kill all the rulers. That's why he's Kang the Conqueror. He killed all the rulers to prevent any uprisings. He was the supreme ruler of every land he touched, but he was in love with Ravonna so much that he wanted to marry her. As an affront to his people's code, Kang gets betrayed from inside his own organization. They go and kill him, and Ravonna jumps in the way to save Kang. That being said, she saves Kang because with her dying breath, she professes how much she loves him. In the aftermath of her death, Kang then goes through a convoluted storyline where he splits himself in two, one looking for a way to save Ravonna's life, but in manipulating that timeline, they actually get into a situation where Kang himself was killed as opposed to Ravonna in a branch timeline, much like we see in this season of Loki. Now, important to note, as we're getting into these kind of convoluted time travel stories, there was a leak online, not necessarily a leak, but a shot from Ant-Man 2, where inside the quantum realm, we see a bubble which people are posturing may look like the TVA. I personally do not think that's the case. But this story of Kang going and searching for Ravonna seems a lot like Hank Pym going in to save his wife into the quantum realm, how he's just kind of hanging out in limbo, where part of him is going outside of himself to try and travel through space and time and find her. So I wonder if shit goes down in Loki, where it turns out that Ravonna Rennslayer is actually currently in love with Kang the Conqueror, how this all goes down, and whether that's how Kang is formally introduced into the MCU in Quantumania as he's in search for Ravonna, the love of his life. There's also other twists and turns in this story of Kang the Conqueror and Ravonna, which involve the Avengers, which involve the Grandmaster from Thor Ragnarok, also involved the Black Knight. Shout out to Jon Snow, who's coming in the Eternals. But we'll leave Kang's storyline for now. Important to note, though, and we'll talk about this in tinfoil hat time, that Ravonna Rennslayer and Kang are very much a love interest in the Marvel Comics. Other storylines involving Ravonna Rennslayer involve her time with the Avengers, where she played Nebula. She was the character of Nebula, obviously, in the MCU through Guardians of the Galaxy, Nebula is the robotic android sister of Gamora, daughter of Thanos. So it is unlikely that Ravonna joins the Avengers in the MCU. I think she's going to stay in this path as the judge of the TVA. But I do see her branching out from that storyline, as she does have her own battle prowess. She does have her own powers in the Marvel Comics, and she was a member of the Avengers, a fighting member of the Avengers in the Marvel Comics. And then last but not least, in terms of story arcs that I'll bring up, there was also one where she was involved with the quote-unquote Council of Cross-Time Kangs, where she ran into the likes of the She-Hulk. She got caught in this thing called a time storm. Important to note, as we're talking about the TVA, time storms might be involved, where she was kind of stuck in this abstract concept of no exit. And she tries to involve the Fantastic Four in helping her get out of the time storm. So there too, references to She-Hulk, references to the Fantastic Four, properties that we know are coming to the MCU. And the last we saw Ravonna Rennslayer in the comics, she was killing and reviving Kang the Conqueror back and forth before the last time of reviving him and eventually reconciling and going their separate ways. It was not a love story with a happy ending. That being said, Ravonna Rennslayer is still out there. She's still very much alive in the comics, and her story is yet to be written. Much in pace with the current trend of comics and the way Marvel is operating this, there will be supplemental stories that go on with the shows. They did it with Star Wars, giving Kylo Ren a backstory in comics. They've also done it with Falcon and the Winter Soldier and WandaVision, where they're releasing new supplemental stories along with the shows. So as we delve into Ravonna's story in Loki, which I think may have some twists and turns in it, again, hold on for a few more minutes till we get to tinfoil hat time. Good or bad, I could see her story continued in comic form, which we will definitely incorporate into this podcast as we go on. But for now, that'll do it for this episode's Fandom Academy on Ravonna Rennslayer. I hope you found that segment to be both entertaining and informative, as well as getting you excited to see where Ravonna's character goes in this season of Loki. But with all that said, here are some rapid-fire Easter eggs that you might have missed. Number 1, the FDR pen. As I said, FDR High School unfortunately does not have any larger implications into the MCU. Spider-Man went to Midtown Tech. I would suggest that perhaps Captain America might have gone to FDR High School in Brooklyn, but that is not confirmed in the Marvel Comics. Where I do see the connection coming in, however, is a reference to Captain America's Brooklyn roots, is a reference to FDR, and as I mentioned in the episode recap, there was a story in Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on ABC about how time-traveling robots went back to kill FDR, and most importantly, to prevent the creation of S.H.I.E.L.D., because in the comics, FDR is the one who created S.H.I.E.L.D. Now, while I do not think that story is coming into play in full in this season of Loki, what I do think it may be an homage to is the fact that Loki, Lady Loki herself, is a time-traveling being attempting to change the past to prevent the creation of something, maybe the Avengers, Ragnarok, as I mentioned before, prevent the creation of the TVA, something. She's going through time and attempting to alter the timeline in a way to change the sacred timeline for her own benefit to prevent something from being created that she does not want to exist. Number 2, the names on the time bomb, the cities where it's going to attack. Let me read them off very quickly. Number 1, Niflheim. That is the cold world of the 9 realms where Hela was being held by Odin. Number 2, Nowhere. It is the floating skull of a former Celestial where the Collector is hiding, where the Avengers brought the Reality Stone to the Collector during the Infinity Saga. Number 3, Vormir. We know it's the home of the Soul Stone. It's also where Nat is currently stuck, if we're to believe the little animations that we saw in Infinity War and in Endgame. We also have a credit scene where it appears that Loki is sitting with Nat talking to her in Vormir. Number 4, Asgard, obviously the home of Thor and of Loki, and apparently of Lady Loki. Number 5, Sakaar, that is where the Grandmaster was. That is where Thor and Hulk were stuck in Ragnarok. Number 5, Ego, obviously that's Star-Lord's father. He was a planet, played by Kurt Russell in Guardians 2. A time bomb was sent to Ego as well. Number 6, Titan, the home planet of Thanos. Number 7, Hala. Hala is the home planet and the capital of the Kree Empire. Number 8, Xandar, also from Guardians of the Galaxy, the capital of the Nova Empire. We brought up the Nova Empire in the last episode in a potential animation scene in the Miss Minutes intro where the Kree and the Nova Corps were fighting. Number 9, I think, Jotunheim, the home of Loki and the Frost Giants. Number 10, we get a bunch of Earth locations here. New York, Rome, Tokyo. There doesn't appear to be any significance with the dates, so perhaps she's just trying to cause chaos. But those are also cities where we've seen things occur. We've seen, obviously, New York is where the primary storyline takes place in the Marvel Comics. I believe in Far From Home, Spider-Man visited Rome. Tokyo being another major city where we see Marvel characters all the time. But then again, if you look at the dates, I mean, we have Rome in 1390. We have New York in 1947, Madrid 1903, Tokyo 1984, Beijing 2005. No real rhyme or reason, at least in the MCU timeline, as to why these targets occurred. But in the other ones, primary targets, primary centers, it appears, of the Guardians and Thor's storylines. As we know, the Asgardians of the Galaxy are coming. Is this a lead up into what's going on with the Guardians and trying to alter their timeline in some way? Easter egg number 3, as I mentioned in the episode recap, Roxcart is one of those corporate conglomerate villains in the Marvel comic book universe. We've talked about the Roxxon Oil Corporation in this podcast before as being one of the primary recurrent foils to the Avengers throughout the Marvel comic book universe. It is very possible the Roxxon Oil Corporation has since diversified, a la Walmart and Amazon, and now they have food stores as well. Shout out to Whole Foods. And last but not least, when Loki is in the library, for lack of a better term, and he's asking the secretary for the files on the creation of the Timekeepers, the beginning and end of time, we see the secretary banging away on what looks like a modern-day mechanical 60% keyboard. Shout out to Gen Z. Go check out the comments of our YouTube video, which is capturing this episode. Go check us out at Fandoms Pod, at FANDOMS POD on Instagram and TikTok, and tell me what keyboard that was. I'm sure you can tell me what switches they used as well as where I can get those keycaps, because I'd really like to recreate that keyboard. But with that, that'll do it for this episode's rapid fire Easter eggs that you might have missed. And now it's time for Tinfoil Hat Time, everyone's favorite segment where I take a few minutes to go into my crazy ass theories about how I think whatever property we're watching is going to shape out and how it's going to alter the major universe that it's in. So, for a few minutes, please indulge me as I give you my theories about how I think Loki Episode 2 and what we saw within it is going to affect the storyline, is going to affect the larger MCU. So there's a lot to get into here. Obviously, the time bomb being the largest one, so we'll start there. The time bomb, as I mentioned before, is obviously going to create the multiverse right here and right now. Whether we see Doc Strange enter the storyline now, whether we see Wanda get a disturbance in the multiverse kind of effect here as she's studying, trying to figure out how to revive Tommy and Billy, I don't really know. But it's clear that there is no way that the TVA is going to be able to defeat this. As I said, Lady Loki used time charges to bomb the timeline, so the TVA can't intercept and then get rid of the time charges with time charges. It's just not going to work. It's a genius plan by what's clearly a superior master manipulator in Lady Loki. Then we're going to get into Ravonna Rennslayer. As I said, her storyline is heavily involved with her fighting Kang the Conqueror, but ultimately falling in love with Kang the Conqueror. Now, as we've seen, the MCU likes to introduce its villains already midway through their plots. Loki had already developed the attack on S.H.I.E.L.D. to steal the Infinity Stone in the first place. Thanos was already midway through his plan and collected the Infinity Stones fairly quickly. We saw glimpses of him throughout the Infinity Saga in post-credit teasers, in stingers, if you will, where we saw him moving the chess pieces and eventually going and collecting the Infinity Stones himself when Loki failed to bring it to him. So it's fully possible in my mind that the Kang the Conqueror Ravonna feud has already been resolved, and Ravonna is sitting there at basically the head of the operational piece of the TVA, what appears to be second behind the timekeepers who she meets with routinely, that she is already in place to enact whatever plan Kang has. I could totally see Ravonna Rennslayer being a villain for this reason alone. As I mentioned, there's questions on Mobius, and I'll get in that in a second. But Loki's line that not everyone is all good or all bad may be a red herring at Mobius, and the real heel turn is going to come in Ravonna, that she is not all good. She is not the all-righteous judge and jury of the TVA who is always going to do the right thing to protect the sacred timeline, but she is just sitting there waiting. Stalling was a theme here as well for Loki. It could be Ravonna who's really stalling here, biding her time at the TVA until Lady Loki enacted her plan, and Lady Loki, Ravonna, Kang the Conqueror all involved somehow in an attempt to bring down the sacred timeline, to bring down the TVA. If that doesn't occur, then that not all good, not all bad line definitely pertains to Mobius. And I think Mobius, as I said in the episode breakdown, is in fact a variant, a prior variant who is now trying to give Loki his second chance as well. He's clearly from the 90s. He drinks the Pepsi energy drink. He fantasizes about the jet skis in the 90s. He either is from the 90s or he went on a mission and went rogue for a while and fell in love with someone in the 90s, and that's why he romanticizes it so much. But there is something that is grounding Mobius to the sacred timeline. He existed in some form or fashion outside the TVA, and I hope that it's not going to be for a malicious purpose, that the not all bad isn't going to apply to Mobius, who's going to turn in order to blow up the TVA so that he could get back to the 90s and not have to deal with this anymore. And then we got Loki. What is our version of Loki going to do now that he stepped through the time door? He's been saying his superficial plan was to meet with the timekeepers to overthrow the TVA. Well, Lady Loki said that is not her plan. How? I have no idea. She must be operating with a larger purpose to send the time charges out to all these cities and all these major key points in the MCU. That being said, Loki knows that's not her plan. And superficially, he said his plan is to take down the TVA. So one can only assume that his plan is now to prove the hero, to go and chase Lady Loki down, gain her confidence in some way in order to take down her plan from the inside. He already has her believing that he was an inside man at the TVA, that he flipped to be an informant so that he could then operate as a double agent if she truly believes him, which you never know how the cross logic, the reverse, triple reverse psychology that the two Lokis might be playing with each other will fall out. But our Loki, the one that picked up the Tesseract during Endgame, is now somewhere with Lady Loki in this next episode. And whether they're going to fight, I believe he's going to try and form an alliance with her somehow to eventually prove the hero when the TVA needs to take her down. If not, this is going to be a hell of a villain team-up in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. We now have the multiverse created, and we have two Asgardian gods of mischief, Lady Loki being the powerful and much more malicious of the two, going and trying to attack the multiverse and to bring down time and reality as we know it. And with that good feeling in your heart, I am going to close this episode. That'll do it for this episode of Tinfoil Hat Time. Thank you for indulging me. Folks, as I said, that'll wrap up this episode. Fandoms Assemble's coverage of Season 1, Episode 2 of Marvel Studios' Loki. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoyed this podcast episode talking about it. This has been a great experience for me to talk with you all through the last 9 episodes now. I'm really enjoying this. I hope you're enjoying it too. If you are, you got a couple things you got to do for me. 1, please subscribe, rate, and review on whatever your preferred podcast channel is. In order to rate and review, in order to properly rate and review most impactfully for the show, please head over to the Apple Podcast app. Give us that 5-star rating. Write us a few lines on what you like about the show, what you don't like about the show, what you'd like to see. That 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts will exponentially help us to grow the show, to get it in front of more eyes and ears. If you don't have an iPhone, start making better life choices. Find a family member, a friend, a neighbor, a dog who has. Go and share the podcast with them, and then both of you get on their iPhone and go and subscribe, rate, and review. Also, please, number 3, if you go check us out on social media, at Fandoms Pod, at FANDOMSPOD on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Shout out to intern John. He's been creating some great social media content for these first 2 episodes, which will be coming at you as soon as these drop, which should be imminently. As soon as they're already dropped. You're already listening to the podcast. So right now you can go head over to at Fandoms Pod on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Now, while you got that handle fresh in your mind, also use it over on patreon.com, patreon.com/fandomspod. Patreon is a resource where consumers of content can go and support their favorite content creators. Please, I think it starts with a minimum of a $5 donation per month that will help us exponentially grow the show. It will allow me to spend more time on the Fandoms Assemble podcast. As I've joked before, if we get a few thousand subscribers on there, this will be my full-time job, 152%. So if you want more on-time content, if you want more content on the Patreon account, which will be providing exclusive Disney content, I have Cruella, I have Luca, I have Raya. Those are episodes that I've already recorded that will be dropping on Patreon in the near future. I wanted to make sure we got Loki out first. WandaVision will probably come out too before that. But if you're over on patreon.com and you love Disney as much as you love Marvel, I will be tackling new Disney movies as they release, and I will be talking about them only on patreon.com/fandomspod. That's patreon.com/fandomspod. Please go support the show. Let us know you love us. And I promise it will return to you 100-fold in the quality of this show. Lastly, one more note. If you enjoyed this Loki podcast and you also loved Falcon and the Winter Soldier, or maybe you're new to this podcast and you haven't even watched Falcon and the Winter Soldier yet, we did a companion podcast, which can be found wherever you're listening to this show right now. Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we got 7 episodes on the 6 episodes that appeared on Disney Plus just a few months ago. Again, it's a companion podcast. You can watch the first episode, then you can listen to the first episode of the podcast. If you want to do it in a rewatch format, I'm sure you'll get the same value out of it listening to it that way. But Fandoms Assemble did do a Falcon and the Winter Soldier coverage, and if you enjoyed these first 2 episodes, we got 7 more just like it, again, on whatever podcast provider you are listening to right now. And then last but not least, please join us next time where we'll be talking about Loki Season 1, Episode 3. This is my favorite time. We're sitting here waiting. I can't even go watch the episode right now. As I said, see episode 1 of this season, of this segment on Loki, I recorded while episode 2 was sitting there waiting for me. So I was able to scratch that itch right away. This we'll be able to hypothesize together for the next week until Loki drops on Wednesday. And again, this is my favorite thing about the way streaming is shaping out in the world right now. The social media engagement we get. We get to write the show before the writers get to write the show the next week. And we all get to don our tinfoil hats, not just me because I have a microphone in front of my face, but online we all get to don our tinfoil hats and talk about the Easter eggs we found and to talk about how we think the show is going to go. So join us next time as we talk about Loki Episode 3. To everyone on the other side of my voice, thank you very much for joining us today. I love you all in your own special way. Until next time.